23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump has for years expressed skepticism about the Western alliance and complained about the defense spending of many of its member nations, which he regarded as too low. He depicted NATO allies as leeches on the U.S. military and openly questioned the value of the alliance that has defined American foreign policy for decades. He threatened not to defend NATO members that failed to meet defense spending goals. On February 10, 2024, Trump recounted a story about his efforts to push NATO allies to increase their defense spending in his previous term. As president, he said he issued a stark warning to allied leaders. If their countries failed to meet their financial commitments, the United States would withhold its defense. According to Trump, the European leaders were taken aback, struggling to process such a blunt message from the leader of a major NATO power. As Trump returns to the presidency, NATO allies are bracing for a potentially rocky transatlantic dynamic. In his first term, Trump questioned NATO's purpose and criticized allies for underfunding their defense. However, as Henry Ridgwell reports, many European nations are now aligning with calls for increased defense spending amid rising concerns over the Russian threat and Trump's outspoken criticism. Back in 2014, NATO allies made a big commitment called the Defense Investment Pledge, DIP. They agreed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, and at least 20% of that should go toward modernizing their forces by 2024. Fast forward to last year's summit in Vilnius, and allies stepped things up by deciding that 2% shouldn't just be a goal but a minimum baseline. To put this into perspective, when this pledge was made in Wales, only 3 allies were hitting the target. But now, in 2024, 18 countries are on track to meet it. That's real progress. NATO even estimates that this year marks the first time European NATO allies as a group will invest 2% of their combined GDP in defense. We're seeing some big announcements too. Norway, for instance, is making a historic boost in its defense budget, planning to double spending over the next 12 years. The United Kingdom isn't holding back either. They've rolled out a fully funded plan to hit 2.5% by 2030, which means an extra $75 billion. But not everyone is there yet. Canada, for example, has pledged an additional CAD $8.1 billion by 2030. But even with that, they'll only reach about 1.76% of GDP, still short of the target. So, while the progress is undeniable, there are still 3 big questions NATO allies need to tackle. First, is this new 2% as a minimum target enough to keep defense capabilities on the right track and ensure strong forward defense? Second, what are countries actually spending this money on? European allies need to fix well-known capability gaps and reduce their heavy reliance on the U.S. for advanced military operations. And finally, how efficiently is this money being spent? Right now, European countries are spending more but not cooperating enough, making defense more expensive and less effective than it needs to be. These are the challenges ahead, but the progress so far shows that many allies are stepping up in meaningful ways. Pertinently, it was during his first term that Donald Trump pressed NATO members to meet the alliance's defense spending target of 2% of GDP, a move that delivered measurable results. By 2020, NATO reported that European allies and Canada had collectively added $130 billion in new defense spending. However, burden sharing remains heavily skewed, with the U.S. still covering 66% of NATO's $1.3 trillion defense budget. In his previous term, Trump's proposal to relocate thousands of U.S. troops from Germany to Poland underscored the need to recalibrate NATO's force posture, aiming to position forces closer to Eastern Europe's flashpoints and encouraging Germany to increase its defense contributions. While previous President Biden reversed this decision, Trump's strategy highlighted a push for a more flexible and strategically positioned alliance. Although legal restrictions may hinder a full U.S. withdrawal from NATO, Trump could opt for a quiet quit approach, scaling back U.S. involvement without formally leaving the alliance. This could involve reducing troop levels in Europe or limiting participation in NATO exercises and operational planning. As Donald Trump returns to the presidency, it's likely we'll see a continuation of his first term's defense strategy, pushing allies in Europe and East Asia to spend more on their military while loosening some military regulations. Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election has already raised concerns among NATO's European members, especially when it comes to defense spending and ongoing support for Ukraine. As European leaders and lawmakers try to process Trump's surprising win, there's a lot of uncertainty about how his administration might reshape U.S. involvement in NATO. While many European Union leaders were quick to congratulate Trump and expressed their willingness to work with him, they've also been clear about one thing: they're committed to protecting Europe's interests. Before the election, plenty of European policymakers were already worried about what a Trump presidency could mean, from military aid to Ukraine to the overall future of NATO. There's a lot at stake for Europe. The big question is how Trump's leadership will impact these critical alliances and the balance of power in global defense. NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is an intergovernmental military alliance made up of 32 member countries, 30 from Europe and 2 from North America. It was created after World War II, with the North Atlantic Treaty being signed in Washington, D.C. on April 4, 1949. NATO's main purpose is collective defense, meaning its members agree to protect one another if they're attacked. During the Cold War, it acted as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union. And even after the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact dissolved, NATO stayed active. Over the years, it's been involved in military operations in places like the Balkans, the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa. The alliance has boosted its NATO response force deployments in Eastern Europe, and together, its member countries have around 3.5 million soldiers and personnel. These nations cover a combined area of about 25 million square kilometers and have a population of nearly 1 billion people. In 2022, NATO members accounted for about 55% of global military spending, and by 2024, all members are expected to dedicate at least 2% of their GDP to defense. Originally, NATO started with 12 founding members. Over the years, it's expanded 10 times, most recently adding Sweden in March 2024. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine are recognized as aspiring members. However, NATO's growth has caused tensions with Russia, which isn't a member but participates in NATO's Partnership for Peace program, along with 17 other countries. Additionally, 19 more countries are part of various dialogue programs with NATO. The United States is still NATO's biggest financial backer, with a massive $968 billion, $900 billion, set aside for defense in 2024. But there's a catch. The U.S. is dealing with a growing debt crisis, and it's raising serious questions about how long it can keep up, or even increase its defense spending. With federal debt interest hitting record highs and Trump's fiscal policies likely to make things worse, this is a big concern. Meanwhile, European NATO members are stepping up, though their contributions are on a smaller scale. For the first time since the Cold War, Germany has hit the 2% GDP defense spending target, and France is also meeting the mark. Countries closer to Ukraine and Russia, like Estonia, Finland, Romania, Hungary, and Poland, have made big jumps in their defense budgets to respond to the rising tensions in the region. Poland, in particular, is making waves. Over the past decade, it's doubled its defense spending to more than 4% of GDP and plans to push it even higher, to 5% next year. That would make Poland NATO's biggest spender in terms of economic output. On the flip side, Italy is cutting back a bit. Its defense spending is expected to dip slightly this year to 1.49% of GDP, down from 1.5% in 2023. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has been calling on European nations to take on a bigger role in NATO, echoing growing demands for Europe to shoulder more of the alliance's defense responsibilities. The message is clear. Europe is stepping up, but there's still a long way to go to balance the load within NATO. Meloni emphasized the importance of establishing a European pillar within the NATO alliance alongside the North American one. This approach is seen as serving a dual purpose, reassuring Washington by showcasing stronger commitment and efficiency from European Union members, while also enhancing Europe's capacity to defend itself should the United States choose to reduce its involvement or exit the alliance altogether. A lot of people were shocked by comments suggesting that Donald Trump would encourage Russia to attack U.S. allies if they didn't spend enough on their militaries. But even before this, European leaders were already thinking about the possibility of NATO moving forward without the United States. Before Trump's remarks, where he said he might let Russia do whatever the hell they want to NATO allies not contributing enough to collective defense, European leaders had quietly started discussing how to prepare for a future where America steps back from being the backbone of the 75-year-old alliance. Trump's comments, made during one of his campaign rallies, pushed these conversations out into the open. So far, the media in Europe has mostly been debating whether Trump might pull the U.S. out of NATO altogether. But what's even more alarming is the idea that he might give Russian President Vladimir Putin a green light to target a NATO member, essentially sending a message to other nations to take Trump's demands seriously. Pertinently, Trump's America First strategy, which seeks to prioritize U.S. security interests and encourage allies to bear a greater share of defense and conflict costs, will remain a core cornerstone of his approach, though implementing it effectively will pose substantial challenges. The primary challenge for Trump's second term will lie in balancing his personal decision-making with the complexities of foreign policy in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. Consistent with the 2017 National Security Strategy, Trump 2.0 is expected to continue viewing China as a strategic competitor, directing increased military resources and strategic focus toward countering its growing influence. However, the alliance between Russia and China, along with the roles of Iran and North Korea, complicates this approach, creating a multifaceted threat to U.S. interests and its allies. A significant hurdle for Trump will be ensuring that the U.S. and its allies meet the demands of their security commitments in both Europe and East Asia. Unlike his first term, this effort will require greater finesse in navigating the need to avoid overextending U.S. capabilities, while expecting allies to contribute more substantively. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel, Typographic Man.